Welcome, everyone. My name is Suzanne Ross, and I am here with Dave Csinos, who is the founder and president of Faith Forward. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
I'm glad you could be with me. We are talking about the upcoming Faith Forward conference, which you are, I'm sure, busy and overwhelmed with all the preparations for that. So thanks for taking time to be with us. Faith Forward was first called Children, Youth, and a New Kind of Christianity, and you had your first conference in Washington, D.C. in 2012?
Yes.
2012. I was there, but I'm not good with dates and times. So, well, I remember it as a exciting event and a collection of people who were fearless, shall we say, and energized by the kinds of things that are happening in the church today. So I'm really looking forward to the next conference to see what's been happening. You, my friend, though, do more than just run this fascinating conference. You are an author, a speaker, practical theologian, husband, which I'm glad you list as part of your occupation, researcher of children's spirituality, and a former children's pastor. You have authored some wonderful books, Children's Ministry That Fits, and Children's Ministry in the Way of Jesus with Ivy Beckwith. And you edited the collection of essays that came out of the first Faith Forward conference called Faith Forward, and your co-editor is Melvin Bray on that one. So you're currently a doctoral candidate and a teaching for ministry fellow at Emmanuel College of Victoria University in the University of Toronto, and you blog at davecinos.com.
I do, yes.
Wow.
Busy.
You are busy, but we're glad you're busy because you are really, your passion for children's ministry is really very important in the context of what is happening in the church today. And so I wanted to talk with you a little bit about what you see as emerging in this emergent church movement. It's sometimes hard to explain, which is an okay thing, right? We're in the midst of change, so that's sometimes hard to talk about. But I wonder if you could try and just formulate what you see happening in the church.
In the church broadly, I think there are a number of things. There are books and blogs and all sorts of stuff dedicated to this, and I'm definitely not the best person to go into all the details. But I think there are a couple things, particularly in relation to youth and children's ministry, that really, I think, that really are shaping what's going to happen in the next little while with the church. I think one of those things is that people are starting to look contextually at ministry and at faith, and what that means is although denominations and committees and presbyteries and all that, I guess the institutional church still very much matters. Mm-hmm. People are living out their faith in a much more, in a way that's more grounded in the realities that they find themselves. Mm. And I think what that means for youth and children is that it becomes really difficult to produce resources in the old way that they've been done, and that the way that they're still done now, which what I mean is the big box curriculum that assumes we all agree kids should know that Jesus loves them, kids should know XYZ.
Yes.
And I think that that needs to shift so that resources are more about helping people understand their context and lifting ideas from a resource as appropriate and putting them into their context as they see it fits. Because for a lot of people, we continue to rely on these huge resources, and they aren't really even working for us anymore. they may work for our neighbors or the church down the road or every other church in the city, but for people who are reimagining ministry and reimagining faith, what that means is these resources are actually, in some cases, and I've said this in other contexts, these resources are enabling people to work with youth and children using ideas that the community, the broader faith community that they're part of, no longer even really believe or rely on.
Right. So
I think that's one thing.
yeah, I before you go to another thing, that so you're talking about. It sounds like you're talking about relevance. For in other words, I'm going to teach you some doctrine about some confession of faith, but without it being in the context in which it's being lived out. It just becomes a boring lesson in a classroom, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
That's part of it, and I tend to avoid I tend to avoid using the word relevant, and I feel like the word relevant was a big buzzword for keeping youth ministry and to some degree children's ministry hip and cool and in touch with current pop culture.
Yeah.
And there are books out there that you can buy that take contemporary movies and turn them into object lessons and things like that. And at the end of the day, though, there was no rethinking of the theology or the ideas that are being imparted through those new mediums.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's happening now is that people are realizing the message doesn't stay the same as we change the medium. And it shouldn't stay the same.
Right.
And it has to, it is a living message, and living things change and shift over time.
Right.
And particularly because all we as human beings can deal with are our interpretations. And so people are realizing that we need to, pull the nails out of the wall that are holding our interpretations up there.
Yes.
And start to re-explore what our interpretations are and what these messages are that we want to share with children and youth. What are the messages that are worth sharing to children and youth? And, so I think that's one thing.
And what else would you say is a challenge or is happening in the church and presents a challenge for children?
One of the things that I was really excited by from our first conference, Children, Youth, and a New Kind of Christianity, in 2012, I was really excited by the fact that we had people from over 24 denominations and different theological traditions coming to this event. And we really had a broad appeal to all sorts of theological views and traditions. And what I think is happening is that we are, the term post-denominational is being used in all sorts of ways. I don't necessarily think our denominations are crumbling. They're being reshaped. But I think what's happening is that there's such a great diversity within a denomination that's happening.
Yeah.
And what that means is within a particular denomination, there's a huge variance of belief and practice. That's one aspect. Another aspect is that people are going outside of their traditions and making connections with people from other traditions. And in that sense, in a lot of ways, I think our denominations are starting to mean less as markers of formational identity, because I'm meeting people who, for example, a Presbyterian on kind of the forward-leaning edge of their denomination may have more in common theologically and pedagogically with a Catholic or a Baptist or a Pentecostal who is also on that forward-leaning edge. So that Presbyterian may have more in common with people from other denominations who share those values than with other Presbyterians with their same denomination.
Right.
And so I think events like Faith Forward, and there's other resources out there as well, really forge those bonds across denominations and let those people know that there is more out there, and there are others just like them who are doing this creative reimagining together.
Mm-hmm.
Because for some people, it's a really lonely space in a particular tradition.
Yes.
When you're one of a few people who are really trying to push the boundaries. And traditions and denominations are huge ships to turn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one way we need to go as well, is forging resources and collaboration across different traditions.
Mm-hmm.
What
Yeah.
that means in terms of curricular resources, though, they're still very much denominational.
Yes.
And we still rely on denominational publishing houses. However, I think that those resources are starting to shift and adapt to this as well. And you may see, more and more people going to moving out of their denominational publishing house and looking at what's available across traditions and beyond the
And
Christian
beyond.
traditions.
That's so interesting because we just finished that curriculum with James Allison, who's a Catholic theologian.
Yeah.
And so we make this wonderful video curriculum, and people are asking us, who's it for? And the answer they want is it a Catholic? Is it a Presbyterian? Is it a Lutheran resource? Who is it for? And we're like, it's for any of those people.
Yeah.
And so just explaining to the traditional marketplace, when you're trying to place your curriculum somewhere and have an outlet for it, it's just breaking all kinds of boundaries or traditional definitions of things. Yeah. And so it's kind of fun, and exciting. But, I think one of the things that is really important to us here at the Raven Foundation is this reinterpreting of the biblical violence and the violence at the cross. And my colleague Adam and I talk about this all the time because we are mainly talking to adults about this. And as you and Brian McLaren point out, it is when you're discussing this conference, so much of this is happening in the context of adult education. Yeah. That's what our resource that we made for it was adults. And so they're reimagining, reading the violence in the text differently. Well, how do you do that with kids? The questions, we sat for an hour last week and came up with just questions of what does this mean? How do you approach violence in text in a developmentally appropriate way? Yeah. And so I wonder if you've come across people dealing with that yet, or what does that raise in your mind when you think about that?
It raises a list of questions probably similar to the one you came up with.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of addressed this at and we put that idea of violence in the world and the Bible kind of front and center at our first conference in 2012 with a panel with our keynote presenters. Mm-hmm. And what I thought was really interesting about the panel, we devoted about 90 minutes to it, and we had worked out with those on the panel kind of a list of questions and things that we wanted to cover and ideas that we wanted them to address. And we didn't get very far, or they didn't get very far down the list. Mm. I don't think that is anything, there was totally nothing wrong with that. And I think it was a very valuable time for a lot of people. What I think it symbolizes is that the goal, I think, of that time together was to move from a discussion about violence and the Bible and among adults and education in general to looking at with children and youth. Yeah. And it took so much unpacking in that first piece that toward the end it was like, they were saying we didn't really get to talk about children and youth very much. Yeah. And I think what that means is we have so much work to do as adults.
Right.
And I don't think necessarily, for a lot of people, I don't think we're at a good place to even start to really talk with youth and children in a more, in a more organized or programmatic way.
Mm-hmm.
I think things like the curriculum that you've produced are going to help us to think through these things ourselves so that we feel more confident
Yes.
to talk with youth and children.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, though, I think I don't think we who work with children should fool ourselves and work with youth. I don't think we should fool ourselves into thinking it's all on us, because with the internet in their pockets and the incredible access to news coverage and media coverage as soon as something hits, I don't think youth and children are as sheltered as we'd like to think they are. And I feel like with a lot of people there's a pressure on, well, the onus is on us in how we present violence in the Bible and violence in the world, but they are already well aware of violence in the world.
Yeah.
And if they are people of who are part of a Christian tradition, I'm sure they're already aware of violence in the Bible as well, because some of the first stories we teach children are Noah's Ark, which is a story of mass genocide.
Right.
But we water it down, and
Yeah, rainbows
felted rainbows to decorate the nursery.
Right.
Funny thing is, though, 100 years ago, children's Bibles actually included images where the waters receded and the ark is on the mountain, and all you see are dead bodies in the foreground, and the ark is in the background.
Wow.
So the funny thing is, these questions around violence in the Bible, while they may be new for our generation, they were addressed in different ways in different contexts in the past.
Yes.
Even if only through these images that make that violence so raw and so real, through literally images of corpses everywhere.
Right. I know. It's so, I think looking at these things historically can be really important, because we tend to react. We don't realize that what we're doing today was a reaction against something that came before us. And, in an attempt to shelter children or to make space for this new thing that was developing, childhood,
Yeah.
We, in a way, sort of stopped talking about the things that the kids are aware of anyway.
Yeah.
And there's something about silence that is a message as well, Yeah.
And I also think a factor playing into this whole thing is class as well. Because and privilege, which is tied into issues of race and gender, and a whole host of other issues. But there are more children in the world and more youth in the world who, by far, who can't be sheltered from this.
Right.
So I think one thing we need to realize as adults is that the extreme privilege we have to be able to say, how are we going to introduce violence in the Bible and violence in the world to our children? Because the fact that we even think we have a control over how it's introduced in their lives shows the extreme privilege that we have in relation to many other people in other parts of our cities, our countries, and the world.
That's really important, Dave. Thank you for, putting that in a context that is really meaningful. You're right. So have you encountered then, as we're talking about changes in curriculum and curriculum design, I'm hearing you, questioning surface changes, just don't change how things look. But do you have any ideas of how to create some sort of, a new format? Is a format or an approach emerging in your mind that you think might interact well with the new theology? Or is that still a huge open question?
I think it's a huge open question, but I think there are different formats emerging and different approaches emerging. So just in the past month or two, we closed our the proposals for our 2014 conference, And we had tons of proposals come in for people to lead workshops and lead breakouts at our gathering. And there were so many great ones, and we couldn't take them all, all the ones that we wanted to. But they're people who are on the ground, in congregations, in organizations, who are forging these approaches. And I think that I don't want to see one approach come in and kind of overshadow all the other ones. What I want to see is resources that empower people and empower congregations to come up with their own approaches. So I think that they're going to be there, but I think that the idea of being able to go into a bookstore or go online and order a resource that you can then implement in your church in light of this new whatever is emerging kind of idea, I don't think that that's going to happen, and I don't necessarily think it should happen. What I would like to see are resources that help people to find approaches in their own ways and in their own contexts. That being said, I think there are values that are more common among these different contexts, and I think some of those are the importance of reimagining story and looking at. I mean, people have talked about story with youth and children for a long time, but I think the conversation is shifting from how do we introduce youth and children to the biblical story to how do we introduce or how do we help children and youth experience themselves as part of a bigger story. And we're seeing that whole idea of the biblical story kind of fall apart and realize that there are many interpretations of bigger stories. I think another one is looking at holistic faith and holistic ministry and seeing youth and children as whole beings who don't just come to Sunday school or don't just come to church with their families, but also go to school and have other activities that they're part of and deal with struggles that, while we, may think that, wait till you grow up and you have real problems, they deal with their own very real problems. And I think that we need to do better than saying, here's a Bible story, and it teaches us that you should share your lunch with people who don't have lunches. And we're moving to a spot where we are helping them to take their faith and put it into practice in all aspects of their life. And then even take those practices and help those practices be ways of helping them to reimagine faith as well.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things I love about, in one place on the Faith Forward, description of what the conference is about, or your call for papers or something, it was about not just what do we have to teach children, but what do they have to teach us. And I think that's a very important approach, a shift in approach that, you're trying to elevate, and I think will have, ramifications that, we can't imagine really once we begin to learn from the children.
Yes, but it's going to be, we have our work cut out for us.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to take what we need to nurture among leaders is not just educators, but activists and allies who can take on the voice of young people. Because in our churches, there's still, children and youth are still very much silenced outside of their children's ministry and youth ministry. And then if we bring in the fact that there are so many young people who don't even come to our congregations regularly, who also, or even if they come at all, and what do we do? What does ministry look like with them?
For them.
There are great people who are looking at that whole idea of ministry with people who have nothing to do with the church, and what does that even look like?
I love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it, and I am so grateful to you and the dedication that you have to this subject, and for all the work you're putting into the Faith Forward Conference. I hope that it is anyone who has the wherewithal to get there can get there and be inspired by it, because it really is inspiring. I think a lot of times people get discouraged, as you say, we work in isolation from other people doing the same thing, and we can get discouraged. So if nothing else, Faith Forward just gives you a punch of adrenaline to get you through the year. So thank you so much, and we look forward to the conference and to what emerges from the conference.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dave.